Chapter 6 of the Manless Worlds by Murray Leinster. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 6 Man-Made Meteor. No obvious warlike move had been made on either side, of course. Ades swam through space, a solitary planet circling its own small sun. About it glittered the thousands of millions of stars which were the suns of the first galaxy. Nearby, bright and unwinking, Sinab, Kiev, and Fanis were the largest suns of the star cluster, which was becoming the empire of Sinab. 20 planets, 21 with Kiev 5, were already cut off from the rest of the galaxy, apparently by the failure of their matter transmitters. Actually, those 20 planets were the cradles of a new and horrible type of civilization. On the other inhabited worlds, every conceivable type of tyranny had come into being, sustained by the disciplinary circuit, which put every citizen at the mercy of his government throughout every moment of his life. On most worlds, kings and oligarchs reveled in the primitive satisfaction of arbitrary power. There is an instinct still surviving among men which allows power, as such, to become an end in itself, and when it is attained, to be exercised without purpose save for its own display. Some men use power to force abject submission or fawning servility or stark terror. In the empire of Greater Sinab, there was merely the novelty that the rulers craved adulation, and got it. The rulers of Sinab were, without doubt, served by the most enthusiastic, most loyal, and most ardently cooperative subjects ever known among men. Every member of the male population of Sinab, where women were considered practically a lower species of animal, could look forward confidently to a life of utter ease on one planet or another, served and caressed by solicitous females, with no particular obligation save to admire and revere his rulers, and to breed more subjects for them. It made for loyalty, but not for undue energy. There was no great worry about the progress of the splendid plan for a Greater Sinab. All went well. The planet Kiev 5 had been beamed from space some 9 days ago. Every man upon the planet had died in one instant of unholy anguish, during which titanic convulsions of the muscles of his heart burst it, while the ligaments and anchorages of other muscles were torn free of his skeleton by the terrific contraction of muscle fibers. Every woman on Kiev 5 was still in a state of frantic grief, which would become despair only with the passage of time. It was strange that 2 guard ships circling Kiev 5 no longer reported to headquarters, but it was unthinkable that any harm could have come to them. Records showed that no other planet had practiced space travel for centuries or millennia. Only the Empire of Sinab had revived the ancient art for purposes of conquest. There was no reason to be solicitous, so the Empire of Sinab waited somnolently for time to pass, when colonists would be called up to take over the Manless Kiev 5 and all its cities and its women. There was another small planet called Ades next in order for absorption into the Empire. A squadron had been dispatched to beam it to manlessness, though volunteers for its chilly climb would not be numerous. The failure of 2 guard ships to report, of course, could have no meaning to that other squadron. Of course not. There were no spaceships save the fleet of Greater Sinab. There were no weapons mounted for use against spacecraft anywhere. There was nothing to hinder the expansion of Greater Sinab to include every one of the galaxy's 300 million inhabited planets. So nobody worried on Sinab. On Ades it was different. That small planet hummed with activity. It was not the ordered, regimented from above sort of activity any other planet in the galaxy would have shown. It was individual activity, often erratic, doubtless inefficient, but it made for progress. First, of course, a steady stream of human beings filed into the matter transmitter, which communicated with Terra Nova in the second galaxy. Gangling boys, mostly, and mothers with small boy children made the journey, taking them to Terra Nova, where the beams of Sinabian murdercraft could not cause their death. The adults of Terra Nova were not anxious to flee from Ades. The men with wives, though there were only 1/10 as many women as on Ades, savagely refused to abandon them. Those without wives labored furiously to complete the spaceships that waited for their finishing touches on the outskirts of every community on the planet. The small drum of fuel taken by Donna from the warship off Kiev 5 was depleted by Kim's use of it, but the rest was enormously useful. The catalyzer from the same warship was taken apart and its previous hafnium parts recovered. And then the values of individualism appeared. A physicist who had been exiled from Mahraman II for the crime of criticizing a magistrate presented himself as an expert on autocatalysts. With a sample of the catalyzed fuel to start the process, he shortly had a small plant turning out space fuel without hafnium at all. The catalyzed fuel acted as a catalyst to cause other fuel to take the desired molecular form. A power plant engineer from Holon 3 seized upon the principle and redesigned the catalyzers to be made for the ships. For safety's sake, a particle of hafnium was included, but the new type catalyzers required only a microscopic speck of the precious material. Hafnium, from the one bit of machinery from the one beam generator of an enemy warcraft, was extended to supply the engine rooms of 1,000 spacecraft of the Starshine's design. In a myriad other ways, individuals worked at their chosen problems. Hundreds undoubtedly toiled to contrive a shield for the fighting beams, tuned to kill men only, which were the means by which Ades was to be devastated. The scientists of half a galaxy had tried that 5,000 years before without success. But one man did come up with a plausible device. He proposed a shielding paint containing crystals of the hormone to which the fighting beams were tuned. The crystalline material should absorb the deadly frequencies, so they could not pass on to murder men. It would have been simple enough to synthesize any desired organic substance, but Kim pointed out grimly that the shield would be made useless by changing the tuning of the beams. Other men devised horrific and generally impractical weapons. But again, one man came up with a robot ship idea, a ship which could be fought without humans on board and controlled even at interstellar distances. Radio signals at the speed of light would be fantastically too slow. He proposed a miniature matter transmitter, automatically shuttling a magnetic element between ship and planet station and back to the ship again. The solid object conveying all the information to be had from the ship's instruments to the planet station and relaying commands to the ship's controls. The trick could have been made to work, and it would be vastly faster than any radiation beam, but there was no time to manufacture them. Actually, only 4 days after the return of the partly dismantled Starshine from the farther side of nowhere, Kim took off again from Ades with 50 other ships following him. There were 20 other similar squadrons ready to take space in days more. But for a first operation, he insisted on a small force to gain experience without too much risk. At transmitter speeds, there could be no such thing as cruising in fleet formation, nor of arriving at any destination in a unit. Guerrilla warfare was inevitable. The navy of the criminals of Ades, though, went swirling up through the atmosphere of that cold planet like a column of voyaging wild geese. It broke through the upper atmosphere, and there were all the suns of the galaxy shining coldly on every hand. The ships headed first for Kiev 5, lining up for it with such precision as the separate astrogators, hurriedly trained by Kim, could manage. It was a brave small company of tiny ships, forging through space away from the sunlit little world behind them. The light of the local sun was bright upon their hulls. Glinting reflections of many-colored stars shimmered on their shadowed sides. They drove on planetary drive, seemingly motionless in space. Then the Starshine winked out of existence. By ones and twos and half-dozens, the other ships vanished from space. It was the transmitter drive, of course. The repaired Starshine vanished from space near Ades because it went away from Ades at such a speed that no light could possibly be reflected from it. It reappeared in space within the solar system of Kiev because it slowed enough to be visible. But it seemed utterly alone. Yet presently an alarm gong rang, and there was one of its sister ships, a bare 10,000 miles away. The rest were scattered over parsecs. Kim drove for the banded planet on which dead men still lay unburied. His fleet was to rendezvous above its summer pole, as shown by the size of the ice cap. There had been 2 guard ships circling Kiev 5 to keep account of the development of grief into despair. Donna had robbed one of them, while its crew was held helpless by the projectors of the disciplinary circuit field. A second had been on the way to its aid when the Starshine reeled away with the last morsel of energy in its equalizing batteries. With 50 small ships, swift as gadflies, though without a single weapon, Kim hoped to try out the tactics planned for his fleet and perhaps to capture one or both of the giants. He picked up a third member of his force on the way to the planet, and the 3 drove on in company. Detectors indicated 2 others at extreme range, but as the 3 hovered over the polar cap of Kiev 5, others came from every direction. Then a wheezing voice bellowed out of the newly installed space radio in the Starshine's control room. It was the voice of the mayor of Stidham, grandly captaining a tiny ship with his 4 tall sons for crew. "Kim Rindell," he bellowed. "Kim Rindell, enemy ships in sight. We're closing with them, and his voice stopped utterly. Kim snapped orders, and his squadron came swarming after him. The direction of the message was clear. It had come from a point a bare 2,000 miles above the surface of Kiev-5, and its coordinates, which made its location easy. It was too close for the use of matter transmitter devices. Even overdrive at 200 light speeds was out of the question. On normal drive, the little ships, bare specks in space, spread out and out. Their battle tactics had been agreed upon. They wove and darted erratically. They had projectors of the disciplinary circuit field, which would paralyze any man they struck with sufficient intensity, but that was all, for the good and sufficient reason that such fields could be tested upon grimly resolute volunteers and adjusted to the utmost efficiency. On the prison world of Ades, to which criminals were sent from all over the galaxy, there was no legal murder. Killing fighting beams could not be calibrated. There were no available victims. The detectors picked up a single considerable mass. Electron telescopes focused upon it. Kim's lips tensed. He saw a giant warcraft, squat and ungainly. With no air resistance in space, there is no point in streamlining a spaceship, and with the look of a mass of crammed generators of deadly beams. It turned slowly in its flight. It was not one spaceship but 2. 2 giant ships grappled together. It turned further, and there was a shimmering, unsubstantial tiny shape clutched to one. "The dickens," Kim said bitterly. He called into the space phones. "Kim Rindell speaking. Don't attack. Those ships aren't driving, they're falling. They'll smash on Kiev 5, and we can't do anything about it. Keep at least 50 miles away." A wheezing voice said furiously from the communicator, "They tricked me. I went for 'em, and the transmitter drive went on. I'll get 'em this time." Kim barked at the mayor of Stidham. Even as in the field of the electron telescope, he saw a tiny mote of a spaceship charge valorously at the monsters. It plunged toward them and vanished. Donna spoke breathlessly. "But what happened, Kim?" "This," said Kim bitterly, "is the end of the battle we fought with one of those ships a week ago. We put out a decoy, and that ship grappled it. A disciplinary circuit generator went on and paralyzed its crew. You remember that we went up to it, and you went on board. I turned off its generator from a distance and held the crew paralyzed with the beams from the Starshine. There was another ship coming when you got off, and we got away to the other side of beyond." "Yes, but—" "We vanished," said Kim. "The other enemy ship came up. Its skipper must have decided to go on board the first for a conference, or perhaps to inspect the decoy. It grappled to the first, and the magnetic surge turned on the disciplinary field again in the gadget in the decoy. Every man in both ships was paralyzed all over again. Both ships were drifting with power off. They've been falling toward Kiev 5. Every man of both crews must be dead by now. But the field's still on, and it will stay on. They'll crash." But can't we do anything? Demanded Donna anxiously. I know you want a ship. It would be handy to have those beams modified so we could paralyze a planet from a distance, said Kim grimly. But these ships are gone. I could go on board again, said Donna breathlessly. No, they'll hit the atmosphere in minutes now. And even if we could cut off the paralyzing field and get to the control room, nobody could pull an unfamiliar ship out of that fall. I wouldn't let you try it anyhow. They're falling fast, miles a second. They'll hit with the speed of a meteor. But try, Kim. For answer, he pulled her away from the electron telescope and pointed through the forward vision port. The falling ships had seemed almost within reach of the electron telescope screen, but through the vision port, one could see the whole vast bulk of Kiev 5. Two-thirds of it glowed brightly in sunlight, but night had fallen directly below. The falling ships were the barest specks the eye could possibly detect, too far for hope of overhauling on planetary drive, too close to risk any other. Any speed that would overtake the derelicts would mean a crash against the planet's disk. I think, said Kim, they'll cross the sunset line and fall in the night area. They did. They vanished as specks against the sunlit disk. Then minutes later, a little red spark appeared where the bulk of the banded planet faded into absolute black. The spark held and grew in brightness. They've hit atmosphere, Kim told her. They're compressing the air before them until it's incandescent. They're a meteoric fall. The spark flared terribly, minute though it was from this distance. It curved downward as the air slowed its forward speed. It was an infinitesimal comet, trailing a long tail of fire behind it. It swooped downward in a gracefully downward curving arc. It crashed. Which, said Kim coldly in the Starshine's control room, means that 2 Cenobian warships are destroyed without cost to us. It's a victory, but it's very, very bad luck for us. With those 2 ships and transmitter drive, we could end the war in one day. End of Chapter 6.